Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this video is about the current second wave of coronaviruses in Ontario, Canada, and why this is important to understand for the whole entire world, actually. So recently it's been back to school time in Canada, and the kids are all going back to school, and the government's very paranoid. The teachers union is very paranoid, and they're creating a whole bunch of crazy rules where the students have to wear masks in the class. They have to stay at least 6 feet apart from everyone else. So you can imagine all children being 6 feet apart in a classroom. Well, that doesn't mean there's no way you can do that and have like a full classroom. You have to have, so what they do is they have like half the class appear one day and then the other half appear the next day. And it's just a mess. It's not a proper learning environment. And the reason for all of this is, the fear of the coronavirus. So what's really happening? I kind of want to get into that. So one of the things that happened when we first heard about the virus way back in January, there was like so many things that the Chinese government were kind of like letting out, and it seemed like, wow, this is really scary. Like, they were locking people in their homes, they were locking down whole cities of like 10 million people. And it was just pretty crazy. And we saw like these viral videos of people just dying in the streets. And it was pretty crazy. It seemed like, the end of the world. And, at the time, the media was downplaying it. And, I thought, oh, wow, if the media is downplaying it, maybe it's something very serious in a way, because the media is always contrary to what's really happening. And the Chinese government was really downplaying it. And it seemed like, based on these kind of leaked videos, that it was a fairly serious disease. However, months passed and then the numbers just sort of stopped. The government in China seemed to be very good at locking down information, which made me a little bit more paranoid. And the numbers seemed to be like kind of spreading pretty fast when it got to Italy. And Italy looked like a mess. But once you looked into the numbers, a different picture starts. And by March, before the lockdowns, there was even a lockdown yet, I had a pretty good understanding of what the situation was with the disease. It really was a disease that targeted older people, and it targeted people who were generally weak. So if you weren't elderly, like extreme age, like 84 plus, and you didn't have any underlying health conditions, you were probably fine. And that wasn't clear at first. Like, it wasn't at all clear. But it became very clear by about March. And especially from the Italian case, because Italy, northern Italy, the place where it really broke out, there was a couple silly things that they did. And it was mainly really old people that were dying there. So it was kind of becoming fairly obvious that it was an elderly orientated disease, that it would, be pretty harsh on grandma. So what happened was, mid-March, we had the lockdown. Now, if you think about it, this is a highly contagious disease. And it's probably, before then, there was no lockdown. There was like big gatherings. There was a whole bunch of stuff. And it probably spread through the communities, especially in places like New York, where they were having these big rallies within the Chinese community there. And the government was really encouraging people to go to these big rallies. And what did you see in New York? You saw this huge spike in cases, and now it's pretty much flatlined there. The case numbers are really not that impressive in New York. But what I want to explain is what's really happening. And this is the situation. when a disease comes, it can spread very rapidly through a group of people, especially if there's like large gatherings and so forth. That's why the social distancing kind of works. It kind of reduces that ease of spread. But um, the mask thing and all this other stuff is kind of overkill. And overkill with no purpose, actually, because the masks don't really necessarily protect you against the virus. Um, so the thing is, we have a situation where it affects elderly, and it affects the weak, and it already has a tendency of spreading very fast. So probably now, several months later, we have the situation where probably most of the people who could have had it, and it's probably just slightly spreading throughout the community. And it's one of those diseases that probably is one of those things where you can be asymptomatic and just walk around and not know it, and you could be a carrier for many months probably. And that's what it seems to be doing right now. So what happened was in Ontario, and this is where the story is really going, is Ontario back to school. So what happened? Well, there was testing that had to be done. Like everyone that, all the teachers had to be tested, all the staff had to be tested, all the bus drivers had to be tested. Students were paranoid, so they got tested. And what happened was the number of tests went from about 5,000 to 50,000 over like a few day period. It was very quick ramp up of testing. And actually there's huge lines where there are people getting tested. And majority of people that are getting tested are fairly young. They're kids, and young workers at these schools. So what happens is you when you test a lot more, you will actually find more people. It's just percentages. Percentage of people will have some, some COVID. And basically what ends up happening is you get a spike in cases. So boom. I'm going to show you this. So I just don't want to ramble and not show you real stats. I kind of want to show you these stats, and then you can see where the truth really lies. So I'm going to switch over here. And this is just looking at all of Canada. So I'm going to go over to the screen and kind of show you. So we've had about 142,000 cases in Canada. I mean, that's a number of the ones that were actually tested and tested positive. We've had about 9,000 deaths. Now that number has been pretty much steady for over a month. It's been about 9,000. And we've had about 124,000 recovered. So there's about 9,000 active cases. And about 82 of those active cases are people that are critically sick, and the rest are mild. So probably we're going to see another, maybe a percentage of those will survive, but probably a lot of them will die. This small percent of the active cases. So you see that it's a really small number of people that are sick, okay, that are actively sick. Now the thing is with COVID, if you have a mild condition, maybe no cough, just very mild, you will find that you won't be able to spread the disease very well, because the disease it's not airborne. It's not like where you're breathing it and it will infect others. It's airborne in the respect that it has to travel within a droplet. So generally, if you cough or sneeze, where you're spitting like little bits of goo coming out, well, that is what actually transmits the virus. And those things can last on surfaces. They can be breathed in. They can be trapped on masks. So if somebody else is wearing a mask, well, it can be trapped on that mask, and then that person can be breathing in that virus. So, it can be very dangerous that way. But the point is, it's transmitted through spit and saliva. Okay, so if you're not coughing and sneezing, well, generally you're not going around spitting on things. So it's not really that dangerous in that respect. Asymptomatic people just don't spread it very well. So it kind of makes us, feel a little bit more comfortable. We don't have to wear masks. We don't have to socially distance because generally it's not necessary. Especially if you're in an open environment like outside where there's lots of air, it can, it basically acts as a filter just because it blows any debris or any particles out of the way. It just does that. And sunlight does the same thing. It actually kills the virus very quickly. Um, so, so now we look further down and we got the total cases, and it's just going to constantly go up because over time, it's just a running tally. And then we have this chart. And this is the chart that I really wanted to show. And this is the daily new cases in Canada. And if you look at the daily new cases in other countries, it's kind of a similar situation. So this is kind of a good representation of the world. So what you have is the early part of the pandemic in March and April. There was a huge spike in cases, and then it kind of dropped as more people got sort of herd immunity kind of situation. And what was happening was the people that were getting tested at this point in the chart, they were the people that were sick. They were the people that were like probably critical. You didn't get tested unless you felt like there was something serious. You just didn't. People that got tested early on, well, they were the ones who thought that they were potentially going to die. So a lot of the early cases, these ones, are people who got tested who were very sick and very paranoid that they might die from the disease. Then it sort of flatlined after that. So it kind of dropped. And more people got tested at this point who are not necessarily as symptomatic as the early stages. So what happened was when you see the death charts, and I'll kind of go down to that next, you'll see that probably most of the deaths will happen in this area where it's the people that were infected during the early stages of the infection were the ones that were probably the most likely to die. And the reason viruses kind of have this pattern where it kind of goes spike and then down is over time, people will spread it. And the ones that are the sickest, the ones that get it early on, will generally get the hardest version of that virus. Also, the ones that are generally the sickest early on are the ones that are the most vulnerable. So a lot of people probably got it at this stage, but weren't really vulnerable and didn't really experience any symptoms, so they didn't get tested. But the ones that were really vulnerable, they got tested, and they were the ones who probably died early on. So that in Ontario, we had an issue where in Ontario and Quebec, those are the two major epicenters of the disease. What we had was a lot of elderly care facilities were the sources of these deaths and cases. There was a lot of people really, really sick in the elderly care facilities and died. They were generally the people that are in elderly care facilities, just for those people that don't understand what they are, it's people that are extremely elderly and also generally have morbidities, they're dying anyways. Generally, if you're in an elderly care facility, you have about 6 months to live. So what happened is you get some new thing like COVID, and it just makes that timeline more shortened. So these people were probably going to die this year, but now instead of dying in December, maybe they died in March, so just sped up the timeline. So that has to be understood, that these people were fairly sick that died. And now we kind of look at what's going on here. So this is kind of where it kind of flatlines. There was obviously a ramping up of testing, and they were trying to encourage more people to get tested in Canada. And then we have September. September is when the kids go back to school. And you'll notice there's this curve where it's kind of going up. And as I said, they ramped up the tests. I think they were doing about 50,000 compared to 5,000 per day. So just a huge ramping up of the tests. And the people that are getting tested in here are all these younger people that are probably asymptomatic. So what ends up happening is, and if you saw the numbers above, where most of the people are not critical, very mild conditions, not really sick, well, that's this. People that are mild, not getting sick, not dying, not even close to dying, not even likely to die, they're the ones that are this number, because it's all young people. And what you see is if you go down into the deaths, well, it's been flatlined for a long time in Canada. So all those deaths that I was talking about at the beginning were the elderly, the ones that were already weak, already vulnerable, and just that extra little push them over the edge and finish them off. That's the early part of the pandemic. And also it's the most virulent time for the virus. The viruses tend to be very virulent at first, and over time they actually become less virulent, because as a virus, you don't want to kill your host. You want to have that host spread you to other people. And if you kill your host every time, well, that's not really good for your survival. So generally viruses will become less virulent over time. So you'll see that over this early stage, it was the elderly, it was the vulnerable that were dying. And then all those people died, basically, the ones that were least likely to survive from it. And then you have this flat line. And it's been sort of at the same number, even though the case number is kind of going up. As I said, more testing, you get more cases. The number of deaths has been about between 2 and 10 a day, which is, still people dying. And I feel bad for people dying, but it's not something that we have to worry about. There's other things that kill us more frequently, like car accidents and like a billion other things that kill us more frequently than the virus does. So it's like one of those things where the media has really hyped up this sort of case trend and ignored the fact that it's been flatlined in terms of deaths. And that's what we really should be looking at. How many people are actually dying? How many people are actually critically ill that are these new infected? What are the average ages? And they actually mention the average age, and they actually use it to scare people, where they say, oh, it's like a lot of young people, and we got to lock down those young people because they're spreading it and they're getting sick. But what we know is that young people, when they get it, they generally don't get sick. And asymptomatic people generally aren't very good at spreading it. So the other fear that people have is that, oh, you're going to kill grandma. Well, if you're asymptomatic, you're probably not going to kill grandma. So don't worry. And the best thing is to have the youth get exposed and then build in herd immunity, because that herd immunity is what will actually end up protecting grandma. So we want that herd immunity as soon as possible. And I think we almost have it in Canada, because generally what we're seeing is people that are being tested, they're not really sick. They're just basically carriers at this point. So that is my summary of the current situation in Canada. And it really does translate to other places. You can see the same in other countries, where as they ramp up testing, they really are just seeing younger people getting it, and it's not really something that's serious. The ones that have died, that's the ones that were probably going to die anyways. So there was a CDC report that kind of confirmed the same kind of things in the US. It's just, we have to kind of reduce the fear that's going on in our society right now. Because if we continue this, if we continue the measures that we're doing, where we're restricting people's freedoms, we're forcing them to socially distance and wear masks and do all these things that basically ruin people's lives, we're going to have more serious consequences than just the virus. The number of people that are potentially at risk of like either dying or or being financially ruined is quite serious. And we have to really say, hey, enough is enough. And we have to go back to normal. This new normal is not normal. So we got to go back to real normal, where we realize that, death is part of life, and sometimes people will die, and that's sad and it's tragic, but that's part of life. We can't go on fearing death, because we'll never live if that's the case. Another thing that we have to realize is this is the first time we've really tracked any disease this thoroughly, where we have the active case numbers and we're always tracking these numbers. And it is not necessarily the best thing, because what ends up happening is we have a tendency of fearing things that, we're fearing the numbers rather than actually knowing what's going on. And what happens is, like, if we track the common cold this same way, with this same thoroughness, probably would see all these spikes in cases. Oh my goodness, there's a huge spike in cases. And there are deaths associated to the common cold. And if you say, oh, well, look at the cases, they're spiking, we gotta lock down or do something based on these numbers spiking, well, that it's just going to create paranoia, is my point. Like, you can't control it. There will be spikes in any kind of disease. It just happens. That's how diseases behave in our society. Every winter, there will be a spike in cases because people are more indoors. They're in environments where they're not getting enough sunlight, and their immune systems are weakened, and generally they will get sick. So every year during winter, it just happens that people will get the flu, and majority of people will recover, and some people will die. And the same thing is going to happen with coronavirus. It is going to be one of those things that we have to live with. It's sad that we have another thing that we have to worry about, but if we treat it with kind of responsibility rather than panic, we should be fine. Wash our hands, cover our mouth when we cough or sneeze, do the basics, and we'll be fine. So I hope this video has eased some of the fears that people have about COVID. That was really my intent with this video. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And give me your feedback. What do you think about what I showed in the numbers? I showed the real numbers, and I try to be as factual as possible. And I'd love to hear your feedback. Thanks for watching. Bye.